I am not going to become a musician. In fact, I am going to learn how to do taxes.
I was on the subway one day and I see H&R Block, learn to prepare your own income taxes. There was always this aroma of, grease and lots of flies.
Taxes sound like so much more fun.
Living in New York City, you never know what's going to come across your desk.
Welcome to The People Behind the Books, the show where we step away from the books and budgets to meet the humans who power the tax and accounting world. Everyday stories, meaningful conversations, and a reminder that behind every spreadsheet is a person with a perspective. I'm your host, Yehuda. Let's meet today's guests. Hello, Phyllis. Welcome to The People Behind the Books. I'm so excited to have you here. This meeting is long in the works, so I'm happy we were able to finally find time. But for those of you who don't know my friend, this is Phyllis Jo Kubey from the great state of New York. And I'm going to let you give a quick intro on yourself, and then we'll dive a little bit more into your background and history and how you came to be in the position that you were throughout your career in the tax and accounting world and everything around that.
Well, great. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I know we worked on this for a long time, and it's great to see you.
Yeah, you as well.
So, yeah.
It's not like our first meeting at a bar a few years ago, but we'll have to do that again.
Different. Yeah, we'll have to bring that one back. Yeah, so my name is Phyllis Jo Kubey. I'm an EA and a CFP. I'm also an NTPI Fellow, National Tax Practice Institute. And I am right in the middle of New York City. I have been in practice for 40 years. And in fact, I actually just transitioned my practice to a very dear friend and colleague. So I spent last tax season was my first in 40 years without really being a tax season. But when I was practicing, my practice was mainly, I'd say, complex individual returns, a lot of people in the performing arts. I had kind of a strange clergy niche that I developed, and a lot of international people, both non-resident aliens working in the United States and US citizens and residents living and working abroad. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
So it sounds like you got the full gamut, and living in New York State, in New York City especially, that probably helped you develop your skills even more because there's so much more complex, or there's so much more complexity involved in that. But let's back up before we go into your dream tax season, which I would love to hear more about. Let's back up for a second and tell everybody where you're originally from and how you even got into the tax world.
Yeah, so born and bred in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I lived there until I was 27 or something like that when I moved to New York. And I come from a musical family. My parents were both, believe it or not, bassoonists. They both played in the Pittsburgh Symphony. My dad was the principal bassoonist for many, many, many years. My mom played contrabassoon until I was born, and then she stopped playing full time, but still, played with them a lot when they needed an extra bassoon. So I call myself affectionately an orchestra brat, and I grew up with so much wonderful exposure to music. I mean, I went to concerts every week, went to operas, plays, ballets, and at the time, the Pittsburgh Symphony didn't have a full-time season, so a lot of the musicians would have to find summer jobs. So my parents' summer job was playing in the Chautauqua Symphony in Chautauqua, New York, which is absolutely one of the most fantastic places. And it was a great place to kind of grow up and spend summers as a kid.
Wow, so you came from this extremely musical background, and at some point you said, listen, music is nice and everything, but Taxes. Taxes sound like so much more fun.
Well, I would say I backed into that in a rather unusual way. I did actually make a short attempt to stay out of music as a field. I started my college career as a philosophy major, but then I quickly got pulled back in to music. When I was growing up, I played piano and violin. And then when I was in my early college days, I suddenly discovered that I had a voice. And the way I discovered that was my parents were looking for activities to keep me from having too much time to get into trouble. So they found a choir for me to join, and the person was like, wow, this girl can sing. And so I started taking lessons, and eventually I decided to go into singing. And I went to Carnegie Mellon as a voice major, got my undergraduate degree there, and did a year in the master's program. And then I actually dropped out of the master's program because I was doing a lot of teaching. So I was a coach accompanist, working with singers, accompanying the opera workshop, and doing a lot of freelance activity in the city. And then at some point I thought, I'm not really sure that the opera career, which is kind of where I was going, is for me. But I thought I don't want to be sitting around in my 50s saying, oh, if only I'd gone to New York, my life would have been great. So I thought, you know what? I feel like I want to take a change, make a different direction. But I went to New York and I didn't want to just plop myself down there. So I applied and auditioned for the Juilliard School. I got in, which was totally amazing. And so I went to New York and I did my master's degree at Juilliard. And all the time I figured if at the end of my 2 years I still feel like I want to go in a different direction, I'll never be able to say, oh, if only. So lo and behold, 2 years came and went. I, walked and got my master's degree, and I thought, I still feel like somehow this isn't for me. So it was a big deal. My parents were quite surprised, and I had a patron at the time who was quite surprised, but everybody was super supportive. So I actually had worked in the Juilliard registrar's office on work study, and I loved working there, and they offered me a job. So I took the job, and I was working, and then I thought, well, now that I'm not rehearsing, not singing, not performing, I should really take a class. And seriously, I was looking at things like macrobiotic cooking or some kind of natural healing. That was really what interested me. But I was on the subway one day and I see H&R Block, learn to prepare your own income taxes. And I thought, that sounds very practical. I had done my own income taxes very badly, as I found out later. So I signed up for the course. I think it was less than $300 at the time. We met twice a week in a little room on the Upper West Side, and it was next to a Popeye's fried chicken. So there was always this aroma of, grease and lots of flies and stuff like that. But the teacher was fabulous. And there were also some really cool people in that class, one of whom was a CPA. And I said, why are you taking this course? He said, because we don't learn about individual taxation. And he said, in fact, we don't learn about that, that much taxation at all unless we choose to specialize. So I'm a controller at a small business, but, I want to prepare individual taxes, and this was the way to learn. So lo and behold, they hired me out of the class, and I began my career working for H&R Block, which I have to say, I know a lot of people bash H&R Block. It was the best experience. And as you said before, living in New York City, you never know what's going to come across your desk.
Yeah, it's so funny. You almost had this opposite trope where instead of saying, "Mom, Dad, I'm done with college. I'm going to become a musician
Yeah.
and travel the world." You did the exact opposite. You said, "Mom, Dad, I am not going to become a musician. In fact, I am going to learn how to do taxes." Which is very funny. And so even though you went ahead and shifted from music to taxes, music has always still been a large part of your life and what you've done, especially on the
Yeah.
side.
And so, after a couple of years where I really didn't sing at all, people kept kind of roping me back in. It's like, will you do this on my recital? And so I started singing again. And I think at some point I started taking voice lessons again. And then I discovered this wonderful community of freelance singers in New York that did everything under the sun, but a lot of professional choral and vocal ensemble work. And so, almost any professional chorus, it was all the same people. We were all just contracted on a per gig basis. So we would call ourselves the New York blank singers. It could be today it's the New York concert singers, today it's the New York virtuoso singers. And so these people were really great. But the other thing about it was, at some point, people found out that I did taxes, and they really wanted me to do their taxes because they felt like I was one of them and I understood them. I wouldn't judge them. And so people really wanted me to do their taxes, but they didn't want to come to my H&R Block office, which was at the time in a not so great neighborhood. I mean, I never had any problem there, but people just didn't want to do the H&R Block thing. So here's my business plan. I had at the time a 2-room apartment with a roommate, and I thought, maybe I could throw out my roommate, use the other room as an office, and write off half of my rent. And that's what I did. It was a little tricky convincing my roommate to go elsewhere, but he did. And then, that was kind of my beginning. And I know I'm dating myself here, but at the time, it was pre computers. I mean, I'm sure there were computers, but we weren't using them in the tax preparation world. So really, all you needed was paper forms, a good pencil and an eraser, and access to a Xerox machine. So that was that. And, it just kind of went from there. And the funniest thing about it was I really never had to advertise or look for clients because I met them doing my singing gigs, and then they would tell their friends and blah, 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 blah. So it was really kind of an amazing way to start a business by accident.
That's awesome. So this is I would say for all the accountants and tax professionals specifically out there that may feel like they work a little too much, you could convince yourself to work a little less and get some hobbies because it will only get you more clients. So
That's true. That's a very good point. I mean, a lot of times, when people ask me how do you get clients? I think the best way is just to go out and meet people. Go give a presentation at a local community group. Maybe get aligned with your local legislators, government officials. Offer to give a talk for their constituents. So it's really really important. And then of course today, social media is such a big part of the equation. I mean, I have to admit, I was kind of a latecomer to social media and kind of came in kicking and screaming. But once I got there, I sort of jumped in with both feet. And then at one point, I realized I didn't have a website. And I didn't want a website because I really wasn't looking for more business at the time, but I felt like I kind of needed one just because of the kind of professional exposure that I had. So I did actually, I have a nice website, and I was amazed at how many people would find me on the internet. And when I interviewed them, I'd say, well, what made you choose me? And, oh, we researched and we decided you are the best. And so I don't know exactly how they came to that conclusion,
That's
but,
funny.
it was really funny. I mean, I always kind of felt like the people who needed me would find me. And a lot of times they did.
Yeah. I have that sometimes where people will call me and I'll say, "Hey, just curious, where did you find out about me?" And they'll say, "The internet," with zero specificity.
Yes,
And I'll
yes,
just go, "Okay, the
yeah,
internet. That
yeah.
sounds good to me." It's
One
it's it's always amazing where you can find clients.
Yeah,
One thing I can really appreciate, I love this journey you took where you gave an opportunity to bridge the gap between creatives and what I will call the adult responsibilities that we have. Because most people are either one or the other. I can relate very much because I too am a musician. That's something I do on the side, usually around holidays or family parties. I'll pull out my guitar, I'll do some singing. And at the same time, even though I grew up doing that and having a band and playing professionally, once I joined the world of taxes, there was something about it that just made sense to me, and being able to help people and bridge that gap between the creative side and the organized strategic side is something
yeah.
that's so important. I actually have I wrote a song years ago that lists all the community property states. So one of these days, I really have to record that and put that out,
You've
because
got it.
to
Yeah.
this day I can list off all community property states.
That's great.
Um, Now, don't ask me what it means, but I can tell you which states they are. Uh, so, yeah, I can really appreciate that work that you did, and it's so great to see how you built up that circle of trust and expertise. And it was a matter of putting yourself out there and giving people an opportunity to take advantage of your skills. And I'm sure they very much appreciated that. So, how many years were you running your firm, and was it always in New York?
Yes, always in New York. I always worked out of my home, except for the few years that I worked in the beginning for H&R Block. And I was in the business for 40 years. And the funniest thing was I took the H&R Block course in 1985. And as you know, we had a pretty seismic tax law change in 1986.
Phyllis, you're making a large assumption there. I have zero idea of what happened in
Oh my God!
1986.
Well, that
No,
was
actually, I do. I've
well,
heard the tax code
you
in
weren't around,
1986.
but I'll bet
I was
you
not
did.
born yet. No, but
Yeah.
please tell me. This is important information for me to
So
know.
yeah,
What happened?
major tax law change in 1986. And the funny thing about it was, of course, I learned the 1985 law, and then all of a sudden, here I am working at H&R Block with a totally different set of rules. And so for me, it's like, oh, okay, I guess this is just how it goes. I didn't realize how unusual it was. So I always laughed along the lines, where we had tax law changes, retroactive tax law changes, tax law things that happened in March that affected the current tax law, tax
What?
season.
I've never heard of such a
Uh,
thing.
and it's like, oh, okay, we can deal with that.
Well, I can relate to that because I started studying taxes around 2018. And I remember waiting to take my first exam for the Maryland tax license until after the cutoff date, so I wouldn't have to study the old stuff.
Right,
I don't
right.
even know what a 1040 easy is. I've never seen it, never
Yeah,
had to touch it.
yeah.
So I got a chance to like live after that world. And in a way, I feel like on one hand, I always joke around that my children will have it so much more difficult because they'll have more presidents to memorize when they have to try to memorize all the U.S. presidents.
Yeah,
So every 4 years, they keep on adding another one. So but like back in the day, you only had like 10, 20 presidents. Remember, now we have dozens more. So it's much more difficult. And simultaneously with tax law, every large legislation, now we have a sandwich on top of a sandwich on top of a sandwich,
Yeah.
and it gets only more and more complex. But one thing that I did see is that living through it in a way makes it much more understandable and memorable, because there's a lot more context as to what exactly was happening and when. So it's much, in a way, it's much easier to remember those
Yeah.
differences and discrepancies.
And then, trying to remember, like, when did something actually happen? And, sometimes to me it seems like it wasn't that long ago. And then I look it up and it's like, oops, that was 20 years.
But for you, it was just a few tax seasons ago.
Just a recent memory. Yeah. Going back to what you said about kind of melding the kind of more organizational skills with creatives, it's super interesting. I've found in my practice that even though my arts clients don't initially appear to be organized, that they are in their own way. And if push comes to shove, i.e., an audit, they will have everything. Sometimes it's like pulling teeth to get it out of them because it's really not where they want to live. But they have it. And the other thing I've found was a lot of artists tend to be perfectionists. And one of the blocks that they have with things like taxes is they feel like there's some piece that they're not getting and it's not perfect. And so they just kind of keep putting it off and keep putting it off. A lot of non-filers in the performer and artist world. And,
Right.
we as practitioners can really do a great service by helping people get back into compliance. And, if they have collection issues, help them with those and really get them back on track.
Yeah. And it's sort of like you're saying, it really does compile one issue over the other, because very often I'll see people will come to me and they'll want to do tax planning. And I'll say, okay, let's slow down for a second. Before we do tax planning, are you up to date on your prior year taxes? Have you actually paid it? Oh, turns out you owe $50,000. Well, let's talk about that first, because that's a lot of interest and penalties. And we could sit here and from today until tomorrow planning your home office deduction, but likely you're not going to save that much money relative to how much money we can save you by getting you set up on a payment plan or making sure to just pay off the taxes quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So before we can, build, we have to clean up. And that's so great, because I've seen this for my clients where it really emotionally affects them.
Yeah.
Um and I had a client once ask me, like, hey, are you scared to fill out these forms? And for me, I mean, I'm sort of like, well, I read the instructions, I'm pretty sure I know what I'm talking about. And I say that, I hope I instill confidence in my clients, but in a way, because I'm familiar enough with it, I'm willing to take on that responsibility. But for these other people, it's just a black hole. It's this unknowable entity, the Internal Revenue Service, and they just happen to be the enforcer. But it's the U.S. Code Title 26 that empowers all of this, and we're there to guide them through that, to show them, like, hey, actually, it's something we can do together. And when you come out to that resolution, concluding, hey, we're finished your taxes, we saved you some money, it's a very satisfying feeling. What are some examples of clients where you've helped them through maybe difficult times or back taxes or things like that, that got them through that situation, help them then plan and build for the future?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so many people have come to me with, kind of long time collection problems. And sometimes, when somebody's in a collection situation, you always do want to go back and look at those tax returns, because sometimes the tax returns are fine, they owe the money, you're dealing with collection, but sometimes it's like, oh, wait, there's something that was potentially missed here. We may be able to go back and amend this return and mitigate the tax liability. But, I would say as a practitioner, I have had great satisfaction getting people into payment plans, getting them into currently not collectible status, really helping them. And a lot of times, it's pretty straightforward. You know what they owe. You see what the IRS will accept in terms of a minimum payment. They can afford it. You can usually set that up online. It's a lifesaver for them, but not so much work for me as a practitioner. I mean, as a practitioner, it's important that I know what the rules are, who will qualify, who can do the online thing and who can't. But some of the most interesting cases have been ones where, for one reason or another, they did not qualify for, an automatic installment payment plan. And I had to negotiate. In some cases, you really have to get into the weeds and say, you know, what about if we do this lower amount for 3 years and then bump it back up, in the hopes that by that time the person will have a little bit more income. And, in the back of your mind, you're always thinking, well, if they don't at the end of those 3 years, we can come back and negotiate again. So there are all sorts of things. I had a really crazy client who came to me, and I should have known something was wrong. She came to me from some weird, like, third-hand connection. And she lived in my neighborhood, so she actually came to my apartment and we sat down. And usually she said, I haven't filed taxes in many, many, many years and blah, 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 blah. Usually when somebody has that situation and they come to you, they've got a couple of shopping bags or something. They've got something with them. This woman had nothing. And so we talked, and I sent her back home. I said, I got her power of attorney so that I could pull her transcripts and find out what was going on. And I sent her back home, and I gave her a list of things. And she went back home. She came back, and she still had nothing. And I was like, And I looked at her and I said, I hope you're not offended by my asking you this, but are you a hoarder? And she almost burst into tears. She said, yes, yes, yes. She said, I'm sure I have every piece of paper I've ever received in my life, and it's all in my apartment, but I cannot find it. So it was like, okay, like, draw a line. We're not getting anything before that line, but how can we go forward? And, I asked her if I could come to her apartment. And no, 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 she would not let me. So we actually met at the Barnes and Noble store on Broadway every week. They had like a little reading area with a table and chairs. And I said, here's a shopping bag. Put this on your door. Anything that comes in that looks like tax or finance, just, drop the envelope in there. You don't even have to open it. So we would go through her mail. And in the meantime, I, pulled all her transcripts. I don't think there were even records that I could get, but it was the kind of return that I could actually reconstruct from the IRS transcripts. And luckily, New York State also publishes withholding transcripts. So I actually put together all the returns with no documents. And she had some kind of a huge pension distribution and no withholding. So that was kind of the beginning of the collection trouble. So we got the returns in, we got them filed. She was very, very grateful. And then we had a collection issue. So Also, in the course of this, I looked on the New York State unclaimed property website and I found a whole bunch of accounts that were abandoned. And one of them actually had a significant amount of money, like over $100,000. And so, we had that money. So I set up a collection due process hearing and I talked with the appeals officer on the phone, and she said, all right, I'm going to need this, this, and this. And I said, let me stop you right there. We're not going to get any of that stuff. And here's why. And she was really understanding. And I said, how about this? What if we can pay down the total balance to the level where we can qualify for an automated installment agreement? Would you accept that? And she did. So that's what we did, and we set up the automated installment agreement, and eventually she was totally paid off, and she was the most grateful person ever. And I was very happy to get her back into compliance. Yeah, so
That's
that
amazing.
was an amazing story. I've had some crazy audit stories. I had a client who was an international concert musician, and he worked over here a lot and worked with a lot of orchestras, so he had significant non-resident income. He got an audit notice. I think it goes back a few years. I think it was for 2013. And I looked at the, information document request, and it was like 12 pages long. And I was like, oh my God. And I even called up my colleague, Frank Agostino, who's a wonderful tax attorney. I said, Frank, do I need to get an attorney with this? He said, no. He said, if you're confident in your client, you can do it. He said, I'm here if you need me. So it was off to the races. And that was, it was all correspondence. It was out of the large business and international unit in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I remember, just sending boxes and boxes and boxes of stuff. And eventually, this auditor was amazing. He went through everything, and he actually found a couple of things that I hadn't been claiming that I could have, and pointed them out to me. But, he literally would say, well, I found this thing on page 8 of this credit card statement. And it's like, wow. But anyway, to make a long story short, we came down to agreement. There was one huge issue, and that was that this gentleman had purchased a co-op apartment in New York City. And when he purchased it, I grilled him. I was like, will you ever come here for holidays? Will you ever bring your spouse? Will you ever just, come here and go to Broadway shows? Will you ever do anything personal with this apartment? He said, no, absolutely not. There's a Murphy bed, there are bookshelves, there's, a piano, and that is it. I just need a place to practice and be based when I'm in the States. So we took off 100% of that apartment, and that became a sticking point. And so I was gathering my data for that, and literally the week before I was going to do my response, the IRS had put up what they call an international practice unit, which are gold nuggets. They're basically training materials for the IRS employees on various issues. And they basically, there's citations. It's like they've done all the research for you. And I had looked for, apportionment or allocation of deductions for, US source, non-US source. There had been nothing there. They literally published one a week before I had to respond. I cut and pasted that, practice unit into a Word document, used their language, say, this is what, here's the code. this is what you say, this is what I say. And I went back with that. And eventually the auditor came back and he said, and he disallowed it. And I said, I'm going to take this to appeals. And I sent back more. He came back, he said, I took this to counsel's office and they looked at the hazards of litigation and thought, we don't have a good chance of winning here. So we got it. But it was, oh my God, it was such a process. And, but
That
here
sounds
again,
so stressful
it,
also.
it comes back to the organizational skills of a performing artist because he had everything and his numbers they tied in to the penny. I was so impressed. So
That's
yeah.
really, really cool. That's amazing to see, what you're describing, where while sometimes something is so simple from your end, and it seems like, oh, well, what's the big deal? Let me just do this. It makes such an impact. And I think that's an important lesson to give motivation to tax preparers, accountants, people representing other taxpayers, that like don't think that this is just some small thing. But the other lesson to that is make sure to also charge your worth, because we are doing a big deal. Like, yes, it's always, oh, which when the electrician comes in, it's just a couple wires, but knowing which wires and which way to do it, and
I
in a
know.
way that's the 20 years of experience you're paying for. But it's also just, it's so nice to know that we're not just checking boxes and inputting data, we're making a difference in people's lives in a way that's then going to enable them to continue their journey and their contribution to the world.
Yeah.
And that's huge,
And
generally speaking. Yeah, go for it.
the other thing about it is, if you're secure and confident in your position, don't give up. Because my client had literally had it up to here because this audit had been going on for several years. They opened it up into another year. And, he was just like, whatever they say, I'm done with it. And I said, but you're not done with it because if we accept their finding for this year, it's going to cost you thousands each year going down the road. And I was ready. I had, as plan B, I was going to an office and home scenario. I had already made an appointment with the managing agent to go down and measure the building. And the response came in before I had to do that. But, I was like, okay, if this doesn't work, we got to come back with this because, he was like, no, you can't take this at all.
Wow, you were ready to go to war. It
I,
reminds me it reminds me, I used to work in another company, and at one point they were working on a federal license for something, and the lawyers would prepare certain accounting information, and I would assist them, but it wasn't my job. I wasn't the lawyer. And then they would send it to the agency. The agency lawyers would then respond with a bunch of questions. And then our lawyers went ahead and got nervous and would go, "Oh, well, actually, let's change this up." And it caused this like just onward roll of change after change after change. Then we brought in a CPA finally on staff, and she had a lot of familiarity with this type of work. And what she did was she stayed steadfast in her position, and she would look back at the lawyers and go, "No, this is our position, and like I said before, here's why it makes sense." And then the agency lawyers went, "Okay, sounds good." And all of a sudden we were in business and we were able to like accomplish things, and it was amazing. It was just a certain perspective and certain knowledge of like, okay, this is not about uh bending to or reacting. This is about knowing what we're talking about the first time the right way and being confident in our position. So over the course of your career running your firm, about how many clients did you service at any given time?
so I think at one point I was up to about 350 clients. which, I know a lot of people who are solo practitioners who do like 1,000 returns, but they're different types of returns. I mean, none of mine were the like, couple of W-2s, maybe mortgage and, investments, get them in, get them out very quickly. Almost all of my clients, well, certainly the ones in the performing arts, they're working in 20 states and overseas. So, sometimes even when the federal return isn't that complicated, the state and local returns are pretty crazy. And so, I say there were very few returns that I did that I could do in less than 2 hours. So, and because I tried very hard to clone myself, and I also, at one point in my life, I was a boss when I worked at Juilliard, and I thought, I am the worst boss in the world. And I resolved never to have employees because I didn't want to subject them to myself. If I were younger, I would probably reevaluate that. You know, I've learned more about leadership and working with people mostly through my volunteer jobs, so I think I might have a different perspective. But I've always kind of been a me, myself, and I. In the old days, it was funny. Back in the days of paper, I used to just, have piles and piles of stuff, and after I worked on a file I would just throw it on the ground, and then my wonderful other half, Charlie, would come home. He's a lawyer. He would come home at the end of the day and he'd do my filing for me. It was so
Nice.
great.
That's cool.
But
That's
yeah, I'd
cool.
say 350 was the top. And then I did a couple of things over the years where I kind of culled the herd a little bit. So I think when I came to transfer my practice, I think I was probably down around 200.
hmm One of the things I was thinking about, how did you balance when you had taxpayers that maybe had extremely complex situations, like being in 20 states, but sometimes those taxpayers, it's not like they're making a lot of money
Yeah.
necessarily. It could be they're just doing a certain job that travels a lot. So how did you balance that to make sure to like be able to prepare for them, but simultaneously not have to charge them, I would say, like extreme rates and reasonable, and still give them reasonable rates to help them?
That's a really good point because, a lot of people, a lot of artists can have very complicated tax returns and very low income. So, I mean, there were times that I did pro bono work or low bono work, but most of the times, I guess my fees weren't that extraordinarily high that people felt like they were hurting. They knew that I was doing a good job for them. They knew that they were getting value, and they were willing and wanted to pay me for that. One thing that I did kind of shift originally when I first started out, because I came from an H&R Block model where, they basically charged by the transaction. So, if you had an entry on this line, there was a fee for it. So I kind of started out with a fee structure that was charging by the form. And then at one point I realized that, there were two taxpayers, two clients who could have basically the same situation. One of them had all of their stuff really organized, gave it to me, beautiful, tied up in a nice package with a bow and a figurative bow. And then, it was like zip, zip, zip. The other one, same circumstances, but I had to chase them for every piece of information. And so, for one, I might spend an hour or 2 hours. The other, I would spend 5 hours. And it's like, that's not fair that these two people are paying the same thing. So I went to an hourly billing model, and that worked very well for me. I know, again, if I were, further back in my practice, I would probably look at, subscription models, value added pricing, something like that. But for me, the hourly worked. And I felt like I was being more equitable so that the clients for whom I didn't have to spend a lot of time, were not getting charged as much as the clients that I had to spend hours and hours hand holding or chasing or whatever.
Yeah. I know nowadays it's very popular to move towards these newer systems of billing, value add, and et cetera, subscription tier models.
Mhm.
But like I saw someone say once, if it's not broken, if it works for you and your clients, then don't fix it unless you have a need, something to solve for.
Yeah,
It's okay.
yeah,
I mean, lawyers are still doing hourly billing, no problem.
doing
Uh,
okay.
they're doing just fine. Well, that's really cool. Now, so besides for running your firm on the side, you've always been a pretty active member in a lot of different organizations besides for your firm. Why don't you talk a little bit about that and which organizations you were involved in and what roles you took up over the years?
Yeah, sure. So I've always been a member of almost all of the tax related professional organizations. I've been a member of NATP, I've been a member of NSTP, NSA, but the organization that got my heart, as it was, is NAEA, the National Association of Enrolled Agents, and my affiliate, the New York State Society of Enrolled Agents. So I like to say I was a very uninvolved checkbook member for many, many, many years. I paid my dues, I consumed, I took advantage, but I didn't give back. And then at some point, the New York State Society started an online forum. It was actually a Google group. And I joined and I watched and I was like, oh my gosh, who are these people? They're so generous and so knowledgeable and whatnot. And I thought, I think I have to meet some of these people. So I went to a local Lower Hudson Valley chapter meeting where a couple of the people who had posted a lot were speaking, met them, and then I went to my first New York State Society of Enrolled Agents conference. And I met all these people, and they were so welcoming and so generous. And I learned a lot, just from talking with people. And so after that conference, somebody approached me about whether I would be willing to run for a director at large position. And I said, sure, having really no idea what that meant. But, I felt it was time to get involved. At the same time, people had been reaching out to me from national, mostly with the government relations end of things, um, and just, wanting me to get involved. And I kept saying, no, 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 I don't have any time. And then I went to my first fly in, our annual event with NAEA, where we go and storm Capitol Hill and tell our legislators all of the issues that are important to enrolled agents and educate them as necessary, and what an enrolled agent is. And it was at the reception after that fly in where the president of NAEA at that time came over and put an arm around me, said, would you be willing to serve on the NAEA PAC steering committee? And I guess I'd had a couple of glasses of wine, so I said yes. And the rest is history. I mean, I was on the PAC steering committee for many years, chaired it for many years, took a couple of years off, and then rejoined. They reformed as the NAEA PAC board. And so I'm now the chair of the NAEA PAC board. I've served on the NAEA Ethics and Professional Conduct Committee. I've been, a pretty religious attender of as many national events and state and local events as I can. I did serve as a New York State Society board member for many years, and then eventually got into the officer track and went through second VP, first VP, president, immediate past president, and as of this past October, I am now officially a past president. So
Okay.
I
Gotten through all the levels.
got rid of my immediate and now I'm just past. So, I'm still really involved. And I have to say, getting involved with the professional organizations really changed my life in ways that I would never have thought. Um, I just met so many amazing people, such as you. We met at an NAEA national event. Um, just incredible people, and the education is wonderful. It's very important. I'm a continuing education junkie. I used to get mad because the IRS only had a two-digit thing when you renewed your PTIN, and I had 150 credits. I wanted to put them all in. But the where you really get educated, I feel, at these in-person events is, at breakfast, at the bar, during the breaks, just talking to people, finding out about people's stories. I mean, I love, like, you have started this podcast because you find that everybody you talk to has a really super interesting story.
Literally exactly that. I was gonna say I that's the reason I started this, was because I just kept on meeting people and my jaw kept on dropping to the floor, and I said, these stories can't be held a secret. People have to have the opportunity to know these stories and to learn about them and to get inspired and entertained.
Yeah,
Because it's so easy, especially as a solo practitioner, sitting in our office in our four walls by ourselves, and it's a little bit lonely, and then we go out to these conferences, and little do we know, we're not the only ones doing this. And there's
exactly.
no better way than in-person meetings. But second best is, this type of media and meetups and things like that.
Yeah.
So besides for being involved in associations, you also spent time, I understand, on the IRS Advisory Council. Tell us
Yes.
a little bit about that. What does that council do, and what was your involvement?
Yeah, so the IRSAC, as we call it, the Internal Revenue Service Advisory Council, it is a committee that is formed to basically advise the IRS. So we report to the IRS commissioner. We have IRS liaisons that are assigned to help us. And it's interesting, when I first joined, it was a smaller committee. That was in 2017. And the IRS, I have to say, was very prescient. When the first Trump administration began, they saw the handwriting on the walls and said, these advisory councils are going to be scrutinized. And it was like, maybe there will be some movement to eliminate some of them. So the IRS proactively took the IRSAC and another advisory council called the IRPAC, which was Information Return Reporting Advisory Council, and then another one, I forget what their acronym was, but they did like tax exempt and government entities. So they merged those three into a larger IRSAC. So from 2018 to 2020, when I served, it was a much larger group. That was super interesting because there were always going to be things that were part of our annual report to the commissioner that, I personally knew nothing about. But boy, was it fun to learn. And what a great experience. I mean, you had people from the accounting profession, people from the software industry, um, people from state and local government tax agencies, professors, I was always happy to see we had at least, 3 or 4 enrolled agents, people from solo practices to large firms. So it was really a fascinating bunch of people. And like with my professional society affiliations, I made lifelong friends. And one of the funniest things was when I was on the URSAC, I chaired, well, it was originally the small business, self employed SBSE, and wage and investment subgroup. And then they reorganized and they split those two subgroups up. And I ended up with the wage and investment. So one of the people on my team in my subgroup was Sharon Fisk, who you may recognize as, up until recently, she was the head of the IRS Office of Professional Responsibility. So I was like, well, hey, that was a good contact to have, and we
Yeah.
we kept in touch over the years, and it was really great to have that affiliation. And then one of the attorneys who worked with her, Tim McCormley, who became, I think, an acting head of that Office of Professional Responsibility. He was actually the URSAC chair when I came on, and he was the one who picked me out to chair a subgroup. So it was like, talk about a small world. But, you know, it's a great, great opportunity. I mean, it's a pretty sizable time commitment. Um, but boy, was it worthwhile. I learned so much. I mean, you think you know the ins and outs of the IRS from working with them as a practitioner, but boy, when you're actually able to speak with the people who are, in charge of the CAF unit and in charge of the modern electronic filing. And one of the things that I did that I was really proud of was I insisted that our subgroup make recommendations about e-filing the 1042, not the 1042X, the 1040X form. And up until fairly recently, that was a
Yeah.
paper fileable return. And everybody was like, no, 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 it can't be done because of X, Y, and Z. And I was like, huh. It's like, do you think we could get like the modern e-file people and the forms people and the policy, could we get all these people in the same room? And what you find, I mean, the IRS is a really big agency. And so a lot of times the various operating units don't necessarily talk to one another. So it was really radical to get people in the same room. And it was just like, yeah, I think this can be done. And so it was done, which is great. Now, of course, what isn't so great is that it is e filed. So it's in there and they have it. But still, pretty much every 1040X is manually reviewed by a human. And I
Yeah.
know they're working on use cases to automate some of that. So I hope that that will happen.
Yeah, well, I guess I should give a special thanks to you because I, in my career, have basically never had to paper file an amended return because right after I started in the industry, that's when
Yep.
e-filing amended returns started being a thing, and I was very
Yeah.
happy about that because paper filing takes so much longer, especially since I just don't have it that process done on a regular basis. I mean, just the mailing alone, and I remember this year I had to paper file a few returns, and writing down my address, my like wrist was hurting. I never write anything. I type everything's on the computer, so
So
that's awesome.
you'll laugh at that, at this. When I first started out, there was no e-filing. So, but when e-filing first came in, I remember going down to the IRS in Lower Manhattan. They were giving a presentation on it. And oh my God, you had to have a special modem. And it was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? So I was like, never gonna happen. And when you're used to doing something, I mean, I would print out every return, one for the client, one, and I think probably one for my paper files as well, although maybe not because I had the software. But it was like, oh my God, but you got used to it. And, I'd have these piles and piles, and I'd assemble them and I'd present them to the client. And it was all beautiful. And, that was just the way I operated. So, it was like, I'm not going to change. And then I think it was when New York started with an e-file mandate. It was like, all right. And so
It's
then,
time to change.
it was a little easier. No special modem or anything like that. And then, my first year e-filing, it was like, I cannot believe that I held out for this long because I think I was still paper filing until 2005. So I killed a lot of trees. But
I'm
now,
sure.
if I have to do anything on paper, it's excruciating. I can't stand it.
Now you can relate. Now you know how
Yeah.
I feel.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's I'll say we'll wrap up with this. Aspirationally, where do you see the industry going in the future? Because there's so much change right now. Besides for tax law change, which is something that always happens, there's also AI. There's people promising tax returns are going to be done automatically by ChatGPT. Although we us accountants have our doubts. But what do you see? Where do you see the industry going specifically with enrolled agents, accountants in general? What's the trajectory you see going for the future?
So I have always felt that as an enrolled agent or, any knowledgeable tax practitioner, we really add value to the equation. So it's not simply taking the numbers, slapping them on a form, kind of the get them in, get them out, get the money mentality. I mean, I think our secret sauce is the fact that we know the law, we know how to apply the law, we know how to implement the law, but we also can look at a tax return and find opportunities for planning and tax savings that ultimately add enough value, more than enough value, in my opinion, to make us worth being paid for that work. And, I don't think I've ever had a client protest my fees because they've always felt that they were getting value for what they paid me. I mean, I have had people come to me and, we've never made it past the initial interview because if they lead with what's it going to cost me, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be a good fit. And I had a really nice little pre-formed email that I would send to prospective clients, kind of about cost versus value. And that weeded out a lot of people. I mean, I did have a minimum fee that I charged, which some people thought was exorbitant. But it was really funny. I mean, people would come to me. Obviously, they were unhappy with the person that they had been working with. And, well, this person did that. This person did that. Why don't, it's like, well, how's that going for you? Why are you here? So I'd say,
Exactly.
it's a super interesting time. There's so much in terms of technology, so many tools that we have as professionals to kind of amplify and enhance our work, make our processes more efficient. And in terms of AI, it's an incredible tool. I mean, I use AI all the time, not necessarily for tax research, although, I've had it do a couple of things that's been pretty impressive. I've also sent it out for, a summary of a specific tax court case, and it's come back with a different tax court case, which was totally hallucinated. It's like, no. So, like anything else, I do not think AI is going to replace us. I mean, there is a big population of people who might not need or want a tax professional. They may do very well with the TurboTaxes. If ChatGPT starts preparing income taxes, they may prefer to work with someone like ChatGPT. But I always think there will be enough clients who want the added value and the added expertise. And let's face it, I mean, one of the things that we really bring to this equation, it's not just tax return filing, it's the post-tax filing dance. The notices, knowing how to understand them, how to respond, and, get things resolved quickly and efficiently, which ultimately, I think, saves the taxpayer money. I mean, I'd like to think that I have saved my clients more than my fees on average. And I think that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally hear that. That's great. Okay. This last segment I call our rapid fire questions. This is to get to know, the purpose of this is to get to know the guests a little bit more. And here are some questions that tend to tell a lot about a person. Coffee or tea?
Both.
Both. Okay. That's okay.
But mostly tea.
But mostly tea. Okay. Windows or Mac?
Both.
Both also?
Yes.
That's impressive.
So
okay.
Windows for my desktop, Mac for everything else. And I think if I ever do retire my desktop, I will go to a Mac.
Okay. Okay. Light mode or dark mode?
Dark.
Dark mode. Okay. Okay. I wasn't expecting that. Android or iPhone?
iPhone.
iPhone. Okay. We're in the iPhone. Okay. Is it niche or niche?
I think I said it earlier. Niche.
Niche. Okay. You're on team niche. Okay. Oxford comma or no Oxford comma?
Oxford.
Oh, okay, good. We can continue to be friends. And then last of these questions, summer, winter, spring, or fall? If you had to choose one.
Spring.
Spring. I knew you were going to say that. What people don't know about Phyllis is that she takes wonderful photos of Central Park and all the beautiful flowers. And that is something I very much enjoy. So I will take spring as well. And when you're not, maybe to jump into that, when you're not preparing taxes, what are you up to nowadays besides for your professional life and volunteering?
Yeah, as you said, I love to walk, and I've gotten quite fond of taking photographs. I like to read. I must say I am pretty addicted to word games, and they keep coming up with more of them, and it's like, oh my gosh.
I can relate. I understand that feeling. Every time I go to play Wordle, I want to play it more, and then I forget about it for a while, and then I get back to it. So I can understand.
Well, let me introduce you to Quirtle and
Wordle.
Octurtle. Quirtle is
Okay.
4 Wordles at once. Octurtle is 8. You'll love it.
I think I have. Okay, maybe before tax season, I'll make some time.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Phyllis. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast and talk about your experiences. It's very eye-opening, and I think everyone will really appreciate hearing your stories and learning more about what you did, and hopefully that will inspire the next generation of people to continue doing the work they're doing. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Yehuda. We're in this to help people, and that's really what it's all about. And this has been a true pleasure.
Thanks for listening to The People Behind the Books. Want to join me on a future episode? Send an email to thepeoplebehindthebooks@gmail.com or visit us at thepeoplebehindthebooks.com. If you enjoyed this episode, hit follow and leave a 5-star rating. The People Behind the Books, because every accountant counts.